Welcome back to the Horse Racing Show. Glad that you're watching us on YouTube or Facebook or following us on Twitter at Horse Racing Show, as well as Google Play and iTunes. And delighted to have this man with us. He has been a great friend of mine for years. I met him at the press box at Oaklawn Park in Arkansas. A noted journalist who is now very famous on television with the NFL Network and, of course, with NBC. The top analyst on horse racing, Randy Moss, joins us now. Hello, Randy.
Kenny Rice, my man. When exactly did we meet in the Oaklawn Park press box? I know you were with ESPN doing horse racing at the time. That's a long time ago.
I almost want to think, you know what? I can remember distinctly that it was Oaklawn press box, and I'm not sure if it was a Val Pony year or not. It might have been. Would that have been like 97, 98, somewhere in through there?
I think it might have been before that.
It might have been before that. Yeah, maybe.
I think it might have been in the early 90s. Maybe.
Yeah.
I don't know.
We've been friends for so long, that's good that you don't know. You know what I'm saying? It's like, how long have you been friends? I don't know. Pretty much since we've met. I don't know.
Makes us sound a little younger if we don't come with a number.
Randy and I met just last year, folks, at the Derby. Stumbled across each other accidentally. But you've been in this sport, I mean, since you were a kid. I remember you showing me pictures of, like, with your family at Oaklawn Park when you were a boy growing up.
You know what's funny, Kenny? My parents both passed away within the last few years. That's not funny, but my uncle bought one of the very first color video cameras back in the 1950s. And I just stumbled across boxes full of this film that he had shot on his new Kodak color camera that was just sitting in his house. And I took them in to have them transferred onto DVDs. And one of the clips is of my parents together standing in front on the apron at Oaklawn Park in 1959, and my mother was pregnant with me.
Oh, wow.
That was my first trip to the races.
Jeez. Oh, that is wonderful.
How weird is that? And yeah, I was born and raised in Hot Springs, and I was raised, spent most of my childhood in a neighborhood filled with horse trainers. My next door neighbor was Bob Holthus.
Oh, yeah.
On the other side of me was a trainer named Jimmy Garoot. Right down the street, Dave Vance. Another fellow named Bob Irwin, who used to be a longtime assistant for Marion Vanberg before he went on his own. And I think he's in the Nebraska Racing Hall of Fame. So yeah, I had no chance. I was raised around horse racing in Hot Springs.
Wow, you've covered many sports and covered them well for years. And among the many awards, and I had the privilege of being there, it was Breeders' Cup Week at Del Mar, and Randy was honored by the turf riders and broadcasters. And you gave a great story about going to the track underage. Now, most people won't realize at one time, I can still remember when they put locks on the payphones. You know,
right.
Nobody's going to be making a phone call before this race goes off. You know, that was in the day pre-cell phone and all that. But you had a great story about going to the track when you're underage.
Sure. Oaklawn back in the day, and even in the not so distant past, because they're in the Bible Belt sort of, had a very strict policy. You had to be 16 in order to get in the racetrack, and they policed it very, very carefully. In fact, since I was raised in a family that loved horse racing, I had cousins, older cousins, that were always constantly trying to sneak in. They wore stacked shoes, fake mustaches, everything, and there was no luck whatsoever. Well, on my 12th birthday, which coincided with Arkansas Derby Day, 1971. I'm going to age myself. Bob Holthus, next door neighbor, close family friend, told my parents that he was going to get me into the racetrack. Well, I was tiny. I was 5'3" when I started high school. So when I was 12, I was like, 12 going on 9, and considerably skeptical that I was going to be able to get into the races. But Bob said, "Don't worry about it." And he told my parents, take Randy to the front of the grandstand, and I'll meet you there an hour before the races. So fine. So I get out of the car. Bob's there. Bob introduces me to this little man, and he said he'll get you into the races. I said, okay, fine. So he took me around to the back entrance of Oaklawn, off to the side, which they had a guard shack, and there was a guard. and the guy said, just follow me and just walk through. So, of course, the guard steps out in front of me and says, sorry, you can't come in. And the man walks up to the guard and says, he's with me, it's okay. And the guard says, I don't care who the hell he's with. This kid is clearly not 16 years old. He's not even close to 16. And I'm not going to lose my job. He's not going in. And so the man I was with reaches into his pocket, pulls out a badge, says, my name is Joe Crane. I'm the Hot Springs Chief of Police. There's been a crime committed. The suspect is in the grandstand. This young man is the only witness. And if he doesn't come in with me, I'm arresting you for obstruction of justice. And the guard knew the gig was up. The guard just waved his hands and said, go on, go on. So he walked me right up to the holding box. And I sat in their box all day long, 1971, made show bets. And got into the races for the very first time on Arkansas Derby Day.
I love that story. I love that story.
And then the punchline, like literally maybe 15 years ago, I'm walking through the grandstand at Oaklawn. I'm back home to visit family, and this man stops me. He had to be 90-something years old, and he said, you don't know who I am, do you? And I said, I'm sorry, I don't. And he said, does the name Joe Crane ring a bell?
Wow.
And I said, you son of a gun. Does it ring a bell? And he said, you remember that? He said, I've told that story many times. And I said, oh, my gosh, so have I. That was fantastic.
Oh, man, that is great. I love that story, Randy. I mean, you're a wonderful storyteller anyway, but that's one of my favorite stories of yours. I always loved it. Randy and I, we did Today at the Races several times on ESPN2. Remember, that was like before HRTV existed, before TVG as we know it now existed. So if you wanted to watch a live race and you weren't at the track or at OTB, that was kind of the only place to see it for a long time, was on Today at the Races. And I remember we did a Mother's Day, and sadly both of our mothers have passed, but we always said hi to Susie and Edith. Your mom, Susie, my mom, Edith. And we're taping this, by the way, on her birthday today. So that kind of conjured up some memories too.
Oh, wow. How about that? Well, happy birthday, Edith.
I remember your moms at least watched us, so that was good. We had two people watching each time we were on.
Yeah, I remember we did the Today at the Races once at Keeneland.
Yeah.
And it was snowing. You remember that? It was at night because we were doing some California races, right? Yep. And we were in front of the grandstand. And it was dark, and we had the lights, and we were doing it in the snow. And my God, it was cold. I
remember that. And you know, about this time every year, and all the meteorologists listening in will be upset with us about this, but I'm telling you, it's like, I forget the order, but I'll bet you might have heard this growing up in Hot Springs like I did growing up in Kentucky. You got red bud winter and blackberry winter and dogwood winter. And so on the calendar every year when Keeneland opens up the first part of April, it's usually cold and the dogwoods are blooming. There. If you ever come to Kentucky, folks listening in, it's cold, you'll see the dogwoods are blooming. How about that, Randy? Now we're talking, we talk weather, we talk everything on this show. Because I do remember, it was at Keeneland, and I believe it was in April, and the race was at Santa Anita, and it was cold and spitting snow on us, and nobody could believe it was April in Kentucky.
And the dogwoods are blooming.
The dogwoods are blooming. They look very nice right now, by the way. And this is the time of the year, by the way, and no one better at keeping up with it all than Randy. I don't know if your ears were burning, an old Southern saying. About 2 weeks ago, we had this guy named Jerry Bailey on the show, and we were both singing your praises of how prepared you are, as prepared as any announcer I've ever worked with on any sport I've ever covered, getting ready for a horse race, not just the Derby. So I know you've got a lot of notes already in the pocket there about this Derby picture, Randy, which unlike some of the most recent years, you don't see that horse maybe storming in there. You go, wow, I can't wait to see him again. Or maybe you've already seen that horse that people are overlooking.
No, I mean, it seems almost like a broken record. I mean, we say this so often, and it's almost become a cliche that it's a balanced, evenly matched field, you know. But, I mean, seriously, there are a lot of horses right now that are solid, that are very hard to separate. I mean, look at the choice that Mike Smith has now between Roadster and Omaha Beach. That's just a perfect example. And Jose Ortiz had a choice theoretically between Improbable and Tacitus, and he's going to ride Tacitus. And there are obviously probably 4 or 5 other horses, including Game Winner and Vacoma and Maximum Security, horses like that just fit right into the mix. And whether you try to separate them, if you're a class handicapper or you're a speed figure handicapper, they're all right there in the mix. And it should be a pretty entertaining Derby week.
And Randy Moss with NBC is on the show today, a good friend of mine for many years. And I know that you know all about those speed figures, and I always pay attention when you talk about them, as does many people that follow you on Twitter or the Racing Forum or wherever. Is this the one where there's just so bunched together that this could actually be fun, and possibly that wide open another long shot pops into it with the way it all seems bunched up, Randy?
Oh, entirely possible. It's possible that we could have a surprise winner of the Kentucky Derby, which there haven't been as many in the last 5 or 6 years as we had gotten accustomed to. Or it could be one of those situations where it's almost like a turf race, where you get 4 or 5 horses together on the wire in a real dramatic kind of finish. So it could be pretty entertaining. There are a lot of good storylines too, as always.
Yeah, one of them to me is Jason Service. Coming in with Maximum Security, who you and I could have claimed for $16,000 back in December. Yep. And now he comes in. He might, I don't know. I think he'll certainly be one of the favorites, if not the morning line favorite, after that impressive Florida Derby.
And Jason Service has done such a good job with Maximum Security. I mean, here's a guy. Obviously, his brother John Service trained Smarty Jones to nearly sweep the Triple Crown back in 2004. And at that time, I don't think anyone had ever even heard of Jason Service. And now, I mean, Jason Service has become one of the most visible trainers in the Northeast and in Florida because of his win percentage. It's almost off the charts. But the job that he's done with Maximum Security is pretty special, because when he ran as a 2-year-old and he ran for $16,000 claiming, I mean, the reason that he ran for $16,000 claiming was not just that Service never visualized that the horse could be a Kentucky Derby horse, but also because the horse doesn't look the best in terms of conformation and things like that. And Service theorized that when the horse came to the paddock to run for the very first time, he was a homebred. He's a son of New Year's Day. The pedigree is not all that, all that sexy, as they say in the business. And when they looked at him, when the other trainers actually looked at him in the paddock, he didn't look that good. And they would say, no, homebred, 16,000 looks like that. We're not going to touch him with a 10-foot pole. And he was right. They didn't claim him. He said he took a gamble. He knew he was worth more than 16,000, but he didn't think anyone would mess with him. And he was correct. And now, lo and behold, I mean, not only was he not claimed, but he'll be, among the 5 or 6 choices for the Kentucky Derby.
Handicappers will cringe, but then this isn't a handicapping show until I bring experts like you on anyway. But they'll cringe at just this thought that I'm going to throw out there. But I remember when Charlie Whittingham came in with Ferdinand for the first time. I remember Carl Nafsker came in with Unbridled, and Mac Miller with Sea Hero, and John Service, who people hadn't heard of. With Smarty Jones, Barkley Tag the year before that with Funny Side. And I said, there's something about these guys that don't just pop up or trying to win this thing every year. And they're good, solid horsemen, some obviously Hall of Famers that I mentioned in there. But I'm leading up to Richard Mandela is coming in with Omaha Beach, and you don't think Richard Mandela and Derby horse usually. That's not been his forte. But, I think it's interesting that a guy like Richard Mandela, a Hall of Famer who's had great horses, is coming into the Kentucky Derby now with maybe the favorite in Omaha Beach.
Exactly. I mean, here's a guy who obviously is one of the very best trainers in the world. He's in the Hall of Fame for a reason. But he's not in the Hall of Fame for the same reason that, say, Bob Baffert is in the Hall of Fame. Mm-hmm. He's not in the Hall of Fame because he specializes in 3-year-olds and in the Triple Crown like Baffert does. I mean, Mandela's specialty has always been older horses. It's been, to a certain extent at other times in his career, imports from South America, long-distance turf horses. But, he's not just a one-trick pony. I mean, obviously, he trained Beholder, the sensational filly that's going to wind up being in the Hall of Fame. But he's just never really overemphasized training for the Kentucky Derby, training for the Triple Crown, like guys like Bob Baffert and Todd Pletcher do. I mean, the last Kentucky Derby starter that he had was way back in 2004. And in the years in between until this year, he only had 4 horses that he even started in any of the Triple Crown prep races. So he's, it just was never really in the forefront of his mind. He always said he'd love to win the Kentucky Derby. If he had a Derby horse, then that would be fine with him. But he's not going to take a horse that he's not sure is a Derby horse and try to force him into the Derby. That's not his style. And now in Omaha Beach, he's got a horse that is taking him to the Kentucky Derby. And boy, looks like he's getting there the right way.
So that random crazy theory is not too far off the charts, perhaps, of mine.
No, I mean, and there are other names too. I mean, look at David Cross.
Yeah.
Sonny's Halo in '83.
Right.
Cam Gamballotti and Spin to Buck.
Yeah.
In 1985.
Drysdale and Fusaichi Pegasus in 2000 comes in.
Exactly.
Exactly,
right.
I remember Charlie Whittingham, and I'm sure he told you this. I think he told everybody this. It wasn't an exclusive. But before, up there in the darkness, trying to get a shot back in the old days, just hoping to get some video of when he had Ferdinand out there before dawn, and it was so dark out there you couldn't see anybody at Churchill Downs in his training. And he told that story, he's on a plane, and the guy asked him, what's he do? And he said, I'm a horse trainer. And the guy asked Charlie, said, well, have you ever won the Kentucky Derby? And he said, no. He said, then you're no horse trainer. And I think Charlie told that forever until obviously he won with Ferdinand in '86.
Yeah, and then with Sunday Silence again later.
Yeah, then he pops back. He peaked in the 70s. Who knew? Charlie was in his 70s when he was at his most famous. And that's the thing with the Derby, isn't it? Because people probably ask you when you're at NFL camp about the Derby. They'll ask maybe about other races, and I know some football players are in tune with what's going on. But that Kentucky Derby does carry so much weight with it. To me, I've always equated it to winning an Oscar. If you don't even know about like acting that much, you don't follow movies, you hear they won an Oscar, you get what they wanted. It was a movie. You win the Kentucky Derby, it's a horse race.
And when you're in the media, you also can sort of get exactly how the public feels about that. Because in the week leading up to the Kentucky Derby, I will probably do 25 radio shows all around the country, from places all around the country, places that don't, like Atlanta, have no racetrack at all. And then as soon as the Derby is over, Preakness, Belmont, nothing.
Yeah.
It's the Kentucky Derby that just catches the interest of so many people around the country. I mean, if there is a possibility for a Triple Crown when we get to the Belmont, then I might do, 4 or 5 radio shows.
Right.
But everybody wants to talk about the Kentucky Derby.
Yeah. And probably from a handicapping standpoint, you would much rather be like betting like the third race at Oaklawn today than always trying to pick 20 horses or 18 or I think 20 this year, but however many are going to jam into the gate at the Kentucky Derby.
And even though the favorites have been doing better, much better over the last, 6-7 years, it's still, to me, it's still the most challenging race in America to handicap. And it's much more challenging, I think, even than it used to be way back in the day, because the horses haven't run as often. I mean, if you just look at the statistics, even as recently as the 1970s and 1980s, the average horses that would run in the Kentucky Derby would have run 10, 11, 12, 13 times in their career before they get to the Derby, right?
Right.
In the decade, starting with the 2010 and Super Saver up until right now, the average number of starts that horses have made are less than 6. So you don't really get as much of a line on the horses going in, their strengths and weaknesses, as you used to, because a lot of these horses have never been put in certain types of racing situations. The Derby will be the first time, for example. Some of these horses get dirt kicked in their face. Some of these horses, have to deal with a fast-paced scenario in which they might not make the early lead and they have to sit 4 or 5 lengths off the pace. There's just all sorts of things that the Derby brings into play now that horses may have never seen before.
Talking with Randy Moss of NBC Sports, a good friend and as good as it gets in preparation and being ready, as you'll see, as you've already seen through some of NBCSN's coverage of the prep races and now getting ready for the Derby itself coming up just a matter of days. And I think I only know two people that actually have met Bill Clinton, you and Eddie Sutton, who used to coach at Arkansas, that, of course, went on to Kentucky and Oklahoma State. You're the only two people I personally know that met then Governor and, of course, future President Bill Clinton.
Yeah, both from Arkansas.
Yeah,
obviously. I've met him a few times, and I was pretty good friends with his brother Roger as well. It was a funny story at Oaklawn Park. One year they had the National Association of Secretaries of State from all 50 states in America, and they had a convention in Little Rock. This is when Clinton was running for president the first time. And they all came over to the races at Oaklawn Park, and Clinton was going to give sort of a keynote speech. And they wanted me to follow Bill Clinton and go up to the podium and basically tout everybody there. Okay, you're here at the races. Here's who I think you should bet on, right? So I'm there and I'm waiting in the wings for, the future president of the United States to get up and speak. And he gets up to this is the quintessential politician. So Clinton gets up and he's late as always. And finally he gets up there and he gives an unbelievable speech. He could work a room like nobody else. And he actually said, because his mother was a huge horse player,
right,
Virginia. And I knew his mother very well. And he said, all right, I'm gonna go off the podium now. So I know you guys are all here to listen to Randy Moss and hear what he has to say about the horses coming up. He said, Randy doesn't know this, but he knows my mother, and he knows my mother's a big gambler. But Randy's picks helped put me through college, which sounds good, except Bill's about 10 years older than me. So
I was going to say,
not quite the truth. But anyway, it was kind of a funny moment.
Oh, that's great. I've always heard that Clinton was the kind of guy. I think you told me this too, and I know Coach Sutton had told me this. Said he's the guy that looks at you and shakes your hands, and for that moment, you really feel like you're probably the most important person in the world for that 1 minute of time he gives you. That he's so intense, looking at you and paying attention to what you might have to say.
That's exactly right. And then if you meet him 10 years later, he remembers your name.
Wow. And
so he's got a pretty special gift, and I guess that's why he was elected president of the United States twice.
Wow. Well, and that's why you're doing what you do now. Not only did you help Bill Clinton even after college get through college, but you're up. Nobody will be up earlier than Randy Moss on the backside at Churchill Downs on Derby week. I don't think anybody you're up before some of the trainers, I think, out there.
Jerry Bailey.
Jerry Bailey will be. You drag him along, don't you? Would Jerry go that early if it weren't for you?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think so. We're 1 and 1A. We get our golf cart.
You do.
We tool around on the backside of Churchill Downs and try to catch as many of these guys as we can every day.
Well, it's going to be, I think, as fun as any Derby coming up. I always look forward to it, and I always, I pay attention to what you guys say because I always like to hear what you're saying as I'm running around there, maybe going to grab an interview or whatever, because it helps hearing what you guys have had to say a lot of times when I'm getting ready to do something, then, for continuity and just something I might have missed because, as you know, when you're on the ground, you don't get to see everything happening out there, just in your little part of that little corner that you're covering.
Well, we always enjoy Jerry and I both sitting up on the set listening to your reports because you can turn a phrase like nobody else, and you're always right on top of it. So it's going to be a fun week.
Well, my friend, I thank you for being on. We do hope you'll come back sometime, and I loved the stories.
Anytime, Kenny, my man. I'll see you on the ground in a couple of weeks up there.
All right. Thank you very much. Randy Moss from NBC Sports joining us on the Horse Racing Show. We'll have more after this.